The first real cold of winter settled over Willow Creek like a wool blanket soaked in river water, heavy, dark, and hard to shake off. Folks said the season always arrived meanest in the high country, where the Mogollon Rim cut its shadow across the land like a knife. Winds came down from the plateau, sharp enough to sting a man's eyes, and the snow, when it chose to fall, fell sideways. Still, life went on. It had to. Out here, stubbornness was as necessary as prayer. Down near the edge of town, in a cabin too small for the memories it held, lived Kathy Hale, the woman people whispered about. They didn't lower their voices much either. Whispering in Willow Creek often meant speaking plain, but with their backs turned. They called her jinxed, ill-starred death chaser. Some even crossed the street when she walked by, like misfortune might cling to her skirts and jump to their boots. Folks in remote settlements had a talent for inventing explanations for tragedy, and Kathy's tragedy had been big enough to feed their imaginations for years. Her husband, Aaron Hale, and their 2 young boys had gone over the ravine on a wagon road, slicked with autumn rain. A wheel snapped. The team bolted. And by the time neighbors reached the wreck, nothing survived but Kathy, thrown clear by some mercy she never once asked for. The healers said it was a miracle. The town said it was a bad sign. That kind of talk clung to her like burrs on wool. Most days Kathy kept her head down, working her small patch of land, stitching repairs for whoever still had the decency to pay her, and tending a tiny stand of winter apples behind the cabin. The apples were bitter and too small for canning, but she'd learned to make them into a decent jam. With Christmas creeping closer, she spent her evenings by lamplight, filling little jars and arranging dried berries, ribbon, and tiny cloth squares into what she hoped would pass for holiday gift baskets. If luck had a voice, maybe it would change its tune this year. But luck had never spoken kindly to Kathy. A good 3 miles outside Willow Creek stood the Blackbird Horse Ranch, spread across rolling grassland that turned silver at sunrise. Men came from as far as Santa Fe and Yuma to buy the horses raised on that land, sharp-eyed animals known for climbing rocky ground and running all day without tiring. And at the center of it all moved Alec Blackbird, a man as much a part of the land as the dust devils that rose in summer heat. He was Apache, born of the western bands, broad-shouldered, quiet, and deliberate. He didn't waste words or movements. When he rode, he looked carved from the same red earth he crossed. Some folks respected him. Some feared him. Some pretended to tolerate him because they needed his horses. But everyone agreed he was a man who did not bend, not for gossip nor for threats. Alec had built the ranch with his own hands after leaving the reservation system years before, determined to carve a place where his people's skills, horsemanship, land reading, patience meant strength instead of suspicion. His barn stood solid. His pastures were fenced with cedar posts he'd cut himself. And the herd was growing enough that he finally admitted he needed help. Which brought Clarissa Dunn into the story, though if you asked her, she'd say she'd been part of it all along. She lived on the adjoining 40 acres, a trim blonde with bright eyes and quicker ambition. Clarissa kept the ranch books, tracked hay shipments, counted nails and horseshoes, and made certain Alec got paid on time. She did it well, better than well, and Alec trusted her, as he trusted few. He spoke to her with the ease of an older brother, though Clarissa privately wished he'd see her as anything but a sister. When Alec mentioned needing a woman to cook, mend, and help tend the new foals come spring, Clarissa volunteered to choose one herself. "You've enough on your shoulders," she'd said lightly. "Let me find someone decent." Alec didn't argue. He rarely did when he sensed no harm. Clarissa spent a week asking around, checking families, weighing choices. Willow Creek had no shortage of women needing work. but finding someone who would not catch Alec's eye, that was Clarissa's private goal, though she never let it slip across her face. And then, on a cold morning dusted in frost, she spotted Kathy Hale, leaving the mercantile, with her shoulders hunched, carrying a bundle of mended coats no one had come to claim. The shopkeeper locked the door behind her with a sigh of relief, as if danger had just walked away. Clarissa watched Kathy carefully. The plain dress, the dull-colored shawl, the quiet way she stepped aside for others without complaint. A woman forgotten by most, feared by some, admired by none. Perfect. Clarissa approached with a bright smile. "Mrs. Hale, I hear you are looking for work." That was how everything started, quietly, almost kindly, like many stories in the West that later swelled into storms. Alec Blackbird didn't yet know the name Kathy Hale, nor did Kathy know the path she was about to step onto. But Willow Creek would remember that winter for a long, long time, and not for the weather. Kathy arrived at Blackbird Ranch before sunrise 2 days later, walking the 3 miles from her cabin with a small carpet bag and a heart-knotted tie as barbed wire. Frost clung to the grass, and her breath drifted white ahead of her. She paused at the last fence line, staring at the spread of land bathed in pale morning light. The place looked alive, fences straight as rifle barrels, smoke curling from the chimney, horses nickering softly in the cold air. It was bigger than anything she'd ever worked on, bigger than anything she'd expected. Clarissa was already waiting near the barn, arms crossed over her light wool coat. "Good. You're on time. That's something," she said, as though she had been expecting the opposite. Kathy only nodded. She'd learned years ago that words often dug a deeper hole. As they walked toward the main house, Clarissa explained the tasks in a quick, clipped tone. Cooking, sweeping, mending tack when needed, tending the smaller stalls, keeping an eye on any foals born too early. Kathy listened, trying to concentrate, though an edge of nervousness tugged at her ribs. "What about Mr. Blackbird?" she asked softly. Clarissa stopped short and shot her a sharp look, as if Kathy had said something dangerous. "You won't trouble him. He prefers quiet. Do your work well, and you won't need to interact with him much at all." Kathy lowered her gaze. Of course. Inside the main house, warmth filled the kitchen from the cast-iron stove. Dried herbs hung above the windows, sage, juniper, and something she didn't recognize. The scent comforted and unsettled her at the same time. This wasn't a home built by people like the ones in Willow Creek. It was something older, deeper. Clarissa thrust an apron into her hands. "You can start with breakfast. He likes venison sausage and eggs if we have them. Cornbread if you're able." Kathy set to work, moving quietly, as she always did. The rhythm of kitchen labor steadied her breathing. Chop, stir, knead, wipe. She was sliding a pan of cornbread into the oven when a soft, rhythmic sound, bootsteps, crossed the wooden floor behind her. She turned, startled, and nearly dropped the spatula. Alec Blackbird stood in the doorway. He filled the frame the way a tall tree fills a clearing, quiet, imposing, impossible to overlook. His long black hair was tied at the nape of his neck. His coat hung open to reveal a worn buckskin shirt beneath. Frost still clung to his shoulders from the morning ride. For a moment, Kathy thought she had imagined him. No man looked that calm at dawn. "You must be Mrs. Hale," he said. His voice was steady, low, and carried the cadence of someone who weighed each word before offering it. Kathy straightened. "Yes, sir." "You're welcome here," he said, simple as stating a fact of weather. "If any work is unclear, you ask." Clarissa knows the routines. The words surprised her. "Welcome here," as if they were meant to ease something inside her she didn't know was visible. Clarissa stepped between them quickly. "She'll do fine, Alec. I've already told her everything. Or Alec nodded once, but his eyes lingered on Kathy just a second longer, a brief, assessing look. Not unkind, but not dismissive either. Kathy felt strangely exposed beneath it, the way she sometimes felt when standing before a mirror she didn't quite trust. He left the kitchen without another word, boots echoing across the hall. Clarissa exhaled sharply, almost irritated. He's not usually that talkative, she murmured, half to herself. Make sure you stay useful and invisible. Kathy returned to her chores, though Clarissa's words tightened something in her throat. By midday, Kathy had swept the big front room, dusted the mantel, and stitched a torn saddle strap that Clarissa had tossed aside for later. When she finished, she stepped out to the barn to learn the layout of the stalls. A pair of chestnut foals kicked up straw as she approached. She knelt to check one's leg, which looked slightly swollen. As she reached for the colt's hoof, a shadow fell across the stall. You know how to handle a young one, Alex said, leaning against the gate. Kathy startled again. She hadn't heard him approach. My father kept mules, she said quietly. He taught me a little. Not enough to be bold, but enough to be careful. You're careful, Alec echoed, as if studying the words. That matters more with animals than any trick a man can teach. He crouched beside her, his presence warm despite the cold barn. This one was born early. He needs gentle hands. Kathy guided the foal's leg, showing him the swelling. Alec's eyes moved from the colt to her hands, steady, sure, patient. Clarissa entered the barn then, carrying a bundle of rope. Her voice snapped like a dry twig. Alec, the buyers from Santa Fe wired this morning. They'll arrive next week. We have to prepare all the paperwork. Alec stood, but didn't move right away. His gaze held Kathy's a heartbeat longer than politeness demanded. Finish here, he said softly. Then he followed Clarissa toward the office. Kathy exhaled, sliding her palm down the foal's warm neck. She hadn't expected kindness here, certainly not from a man the whole town treated like a dangerous unknown. But something in his eyes had been clear as creek water. Not fear, not suspicion. Recognition. As if he saw a piece of himself in her. The thought unsettled her so deeply she rose too fast, brushing straw from her skirts with trembling fingers. Blackbird Ranch was supposed to be temporary. A place to work. A place to disappear into. But by sundown of her first day, Kathy realized something dangerous. A place like this, quiet, honest, watchful, had the power to make a woman hope again. And hope, she knew, was the most treacherous thing in the West. The week before Christmas always drew the whole of Willow Creek into the dusty square behind the mercantile peddlers, ranchers, miners fresh from the hills, and families wrapped in wool so thick they waddled like geese. The winter market wasn't much compared to the fairs back east, but in a place where months passed with little more noise than cattle bawling across the hills, it felt like a grand event. Kathy Hale walked there alone, her footsteps light on the frozen dirt road. A small crate of Christmas baskets hugged tight against her chest. She'd worked on them for weeks, apple jam, honey biscuits, a little cloth ornament, stitched with red thread, and sprigs of dried juniper tied with ribbon. Nothing fancy, but made with care, the only kind she owned. She stopped at the edge of the square and inhaled slowly. People milled about, faces she'd known for years, yet faces she never fully belonged to. Her stomach tightened with the familiar dread. She was still the woman who had outlived her family. Somehow that made her the villain in the story the town had written. But winter had been long. Money was thin. She needed the sales. So she set up her booth on a crate near the hitching post, arranged her baskets neatly, and waited. For a while, no one looked her way. Then someone did, a ranch wife, in a heavy blue shawl, only to turn sharply aside, whispering to her husband, who ushered her past as if Kathy carried a curse like smallp. Another man made a crude joke about unlucky hands, making unlucky gifts. A teenager tossed a clump of icy mud dangerously close to her display. Kathy kept her chin level and her breath measured, but her cheeks burned. She told herself she was used to this, but a human heart never grows calluses fast enough. Across the market, Alec Blackbird and Clarissa Dunn stepped off the ranch wagon, having delivered a load of feed sacks and a list of supplies for the week. Alec scanned the crowd as he always did, quiet, observant, reading the space the way Apache men read the lay of the land. Clarissa walked half a step ahead of him, bright-eyed and purposeful, pleased to be at his side, where the town could see. "Alec, the new ledger paper should be inside," she said, gesturing to the mercantile. "We ought to—" But Alec had stopped walking, his gaze fixed on the far corner of the market, where a woman stood alone beside a display of baskets. Her shawl was pulled tight, her shoulders slightly bowed, not in weakness, but in the weary way of someone expecting no kindness. Kathy. He took a few steps toward her, before he even realized he had moved. Clarissa followed his line of sight, her smile freezing. "Alec, that's your new housekeeper. She can manage herself." Alec didn't answer. Something in him, something cool and certain, pulled him forward. Kathy kept her eyes on the ground as another couple skirted around her table. She didn't see Alec until his shadow fell across the baskets. When she looked up, her breath caught. He stood there, broad as a barn door, coat dusted with snowmelt, dark eyes steady on her display rather than the gawking faces around them. Conversations slowed. People watched. They had never seen the Apache horseman stop at her table before. Kathy's throat went dry. "Mr. Blackbird, I didn't expect—" "Did you make these?" Alec asked quietly. Yes, everything in them." He lifted a basket with a care that startled her. Most folks touched her goods the way one might handle a snake. Alec examined the stitching on the cloth ornament, the neatness of the baked goods, the color of the jam. She saw a faint shift in his eyes, almost like recognition. "My mother used to dry juniper like this," he murmured, "for blessings in winter." Kathy blinked. She hadn't known. She'd simply used what grew behind her cabin. A man passing by snorted. "Careful, Blackbird. Folks say her baskets'll curse your ranch." Clarissa stood a few steps away, stiff as a fence post. "Alec, don't—" He didn't spare either of them a look. "How much?" he asked Kathy. Her fingers trembled. 50 cents. Alec reached into his coat, pulled out a tall stack of bills, and counted $1.53 times the asking price. He placed it gently into her hand. Kathy blinked in disbelief. "Mr. Blackbird, I can't take—" "It's worth it," he said simply. "Good work should be honored." The square went silent. People stared, wide-eyed, as if lightning had struck the ground between them. Clarissa's breath hissed softly, the kind of sound a person makes when something precious slips from their grasp. Alec turned to the crowd, not confrontational, just steady. "If you fear a woman for surviving tragedy, that fear says more about you than her." A murmur rippled through the gathered onlookers, some uncomfortable, some ashamed, some resentful. But Alec didn't linger. He picked up the basket and nodded once to Kathy. "I'll take this to the wagon." Kathy felt warmth spread through her chest, not from the money, not even from the sale, but from the simple dignity he had given her. A dignity she'd forgotten she could still feel. "Thank you," she whispered. Alec paused. "You made something beautiful. That deserves thanks." Clarissa watched this exchange with a tightening jaw. She had known Kathy was harmless. That was why she'd brought her to the ranch. But now the harmless woman had become something else entirely. A presence Alec noticed. A threat. When Alec walked away, a few brave souls drifted toward Kathy's stand. Not many, but enough to shift the air around her. A mother with a baby in a sling, bought a single jar of jam. A miner bought a set of biscuits. Even the mud-throwing teenager muttered a shy apology before slinking off. Kathy's fingers moved with renewed steadiness as she wrapped each purchase. Hope, unwanted and fragile, began to stir inside her chest. Across the market, Clarissa watched her with narrowed eyes, hands clenched in her muff. That hope, she vowed, would not last. Not if she had anything to do with it. Snow fell heavier the week after the winter market, drifting across the Blackbird Ranch pastures in long silver sheets. Kathy worked quietly in the warm hum of the kitchen, her days filled with the steady rhythm of chores. The memory of Alec paying triple for her basket lingered with her not like a spark, but like a tsamus or ember that refused to go cold. She noticed small things now. The way he nodded to her in the mornings, not dismissively, but with genuine acknowledgement. The way he slowed when passing the barn if she was tending a foal. The way his deep voice gentled when he asked whether she'd eaten. Simple gestures. But for a woman starved of kindness, they carried weight. Clarissa saw them all. One frigid morning, as Kathy scrubbed the kitchen table, Clarissa swept in with an energy too sharp for the hour. She wore a bright red scarf, cheeks flushed not from cold, but from something restless beneath her skin. "Where's Alec?" she asked, voice too casual. "Out in the east pasture," Kathy answered softly, checking the fence line. Clarissa didn't move for a moment. Her eyes slid toward Kathy, calculating. "You've been spending a lot of time in the barn." Kathy wiped her hands on her apron. "That's where the work is." "Of course," Clarissa said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just make sure you remember your place here." Kathy nodded, though the words stung. She had no interest in anything improper, yet the reminder made her feel as though she'd done something wrong, simply by being alive. Clarissa left the kitchen then, boots echoing sharply across the porch boards. 2 days later, Clarissa began her quiet campaign. She never confronted Kathy outright. No, that would have been too obvious. Instead, she whispered to the delivery boy that Kathy had been overstepping. She murmured to the ranch hands that Alec was being taken advantage of. And she dropped hints to the merchant's wife that the new housekeeper was getting too comfortable. The words drifted through town like smoke from a brush fire, thin, poisonous, and hard to trace. Kathy sensed the shift before she heard a single whisper. She felt it in the stiff nods at the mercantile, the narrowed eyes of women who once bought her stitching, the way the baker's wife refused to meet her gazes, but she said nothing. She swallowed the hurt, as she always had. Alec noticed. One evening, after securing the barn doors against a rising wind, he found her outside hanging blankets to dry. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, her fingers were red from cold. "You should finish inside," he said gently. "Storm's coming in." She kept her face averted. "I'll be done in a moment." Alec stepped closer. "Kathy." She froze. Her name in his voice, quiet, steady, respectful, felt like a hand on her heart. "You've been troubled," he said. "Something happened?" "No," she whispered. He waited, patient as stone. Finally, she drew a shaky breath. "People are talking. I don't know why. But they are." Alec's jaw tightened. His eyes didn't flash or storm. They settled, grew still, the way rivers do when deep currents shift beneath. "Words from people who fear shadows," he said. "Not truth." She gave a tired smile. "Even shadows hurt sometimes." Alec looked at her, then nodded her shawl, or her calloused hands, or the cautious tilt of her shoulders. He looked directly at the wounded place inside her, the place others pretended not to see. "You do your work with honor," he said. "That is enough." For the first time in a long while, she believed someone meant those words. Clarissa saw them talking from the porch. Her breath caught in her chest. Something had changed, something she thought she could control, and she felt it slipping. That night, Clarissa sat alone at the dining table long after everyone had gone to bed. The lamp burned low, her fingers gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. He was looking at her, at the jinxed widow, at the woman she'd chosen because she thought Alec would never look twice. Her heart throbbed like an old wound reopened. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "I won't let her take him." Snow battered the windows, but the storm inside Clarissa was worse. The next morning, she made her move. A man drifted through Willow Creek from time to time, a ranch hand known for drinking, gambling, and accepting coin for things he shouldn't. Clarissa found him at the saloon, half asleep over a mug of sour ale. She slid into the seat across from him. "I need a favor." The man grinned, showing a chipped tooth. "Favors cost." "Not more than I can afford." Coins clinked softly across the table. "You'll speak to the new woman at Blackbird Ranch," Clarissa said. "Mrs. Hale. You'll get her alone in the barn. Stand close. Make it look like she invited you there." The man raised a brow. "That all?" "Yes." He scratched his stubbled chin. "And what if the Apache walks in?" Her eyes turned cold. "Then he'll think she's not as innocent as he believes." The man chuckled. "You're meaner than you look." Clarissa smiled, a thin, brittle thing. "Just do the job." On that evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Kathy went to the barn to check on the early-born foal. The barn was dim, quiet. Snow tapped softly against the roof. She didn't notice the man until he stepped out from behind a stack of hay. "Evening, ma'am," he drawled, breath tinged with whiskey. "Heard you're mighty friendly with the Apache fella." Kathy stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." The man stepped closer. Too close. "Maybe you could be friendly with me, too." Before she could answer, heavy footsteps sounded outside, deliberate, grounding, unmistakable. Alec. Kathy backed away from the stranger just as Alec entered the barn. His shadow stretched long across the straw. The man straightened, trying to play casual. "Just talking, boss. Nothing wrong with that." Alec's eyes swept the scene, the disturbed straw, Kathy's tense posture, the man standing a little too near. Quiet anger stirred behind his gaze. "Leave," Alec said. The ranch hand smirked. "Was just having conversation." Alec took a step forward. There was no shouting, no bluffing, only a cold, measured warning in his voice. "Leave, now." The man hesitated. Then he saw something in Alec's eyes that changed his mind. He stumbled out of the barn, muttering curses into the wind. Kathy stood trembling, hands clasped tight. Alec turned to her. "He didn't touch you?" "No," she whispered. "But he said things." Alec's jaw worked once. "He won't come back." But Kathy wasn't thinking of the man anymore. She was thinking of the person who had sent him. Clarissa. She knew it in her bones. Alec seemed to know it too. His eyes narrowed, thoughtful and troubled. Storm clouds quiet, heavy, began to form between them both. The barn incident lit a fuse no one could see, not even Kathy. But Alec felt it, an unease crawling beneath the stillness of the winter plains. The Apache had a saying, "Storms rise first in the bones, then in the skin," and for the next 2 days, a heaviness followed him everywhere he went. Clarissa avoided him. She kept to the office, her answers short, her shoulders stiff. But she watched him and Kathy, with the tight, brittle silence of a woman, standing on the edge of something sharp. Kathy sensed the tension, though she said nothing. She focused on her chores, her eyes downcast, her heart pounding whenever she heard footsteps behind her. The barn incident replayed in her mind like a shadow that refused to leave. And in the town of Willow Creek, whispers thickened like gathering snowfall. "She's stirring up trouble at Blackbird Ranch. Heard she was caught alone in the barn with a man." Poor Alec should have known better than to hire a woman cursed. Maybe she's after Apache money. By the time Sunday came, the church pews in town were buzzing with more talk of Kathy Hale than scripture. And Clarissa Dunn, hands folded calmly in her lap, let every whisper coil tighter around the name she aimed to destroy. Alec heard the rumors 2 days later. He had ridden into town before dawn to collect a shipment of feed. In the mercantile, the shopkeeper's son stared too long, his smirk too knowing. When Alec stepped outside, 2 men on the boardwalk paused their conversation mid-sentence, eyes cutting sharply toward him. One spat tobacco. "Blackbird, you keep interesting company these days." Alec's blood ran cold, not hot, never hot. Heat made men reckless. Cold made them dangerous. "What do you mean?" he asked. The man shrugged, feigning innocence. "Just what folks say. Your new girl seems to enjoy herself with any fellow who wanders your property." Behind the man's shoulder, Clarissa turned the corner of the street. She froze when she saw Alec, then shifted her expression into something like concern. "Alec," she called brightly, "I've been looking for you." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The stiffening of his posture was answer enough. Clarissa swallowed. "You've heard things." "I've heard lies," Alec said, voice low. Clarissa stepped closer. "You can't let this go, Alec. People are talking. They think Kathy is trying to dupe you. They think—" "What do you think?" he asked, and his tone cut the cold air in half. Clarissa faltered. I think she's not who you believe she is. I've tried to warn you." Alec's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "You warned me before the barn incident. You warned me after. You warn me every day." He stepped closer, towering. "And now I ask you, why?" Something flickered across her features, a tremor of guilt. Or fear. Or both. "I care about you, Alec," she whispered. "I always have. And she'll ruin everything." A long, heavy silence stretched between them. "I trusted you," he said at last. And Clarissa flinched, as if struck. When Alec returned to the ranch, the air felt sharper. Kathy was carrying firewood across the yard, cheeks flushed from the cold. She paused when she saw him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Blackbird, are you all right?" He dismounted slowly. "People in town say things about you." She stiffened. "I know. You didn't tell me." She let the firewood drop to the ground, unable to hold the weight of it, or the weight of the world any longer. "What would it have changed?" she asked quietly. "People have said things about me, since the day I survived what my family didn't. They'll keep saying them long after I'm gone." Alec stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "You think you must carry everything alone." Kathy turned away. Tears threatened, but she fought them. "It's better that way." "No," he said, voice firm but gentle. "It isn't." For a moment they stood inches apart, breath mingling in cold air. Alec reached out, not grabbing, not assuming, just an offering. His fingers brushed hers, rough and warm. Kathy's breath hitched. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "You didn't," he said. "It was already waiting." Later that night, while Kathy finished sweeping the kitchen, a furious pounding shook the front door. She looked up sharply. Alec strode to the entry, hand instinctively near his belt knife. He opened the door to find Sheriff Colton, standing on the porch, hat in hand, face tight. "Evening, Alec," the sheriff said grimly. "I'm here on order from the town council." Alec's jaw clenched. "What order?" The sheriff held out a folded paper. His eyes were apologetic. "They've voted to remove Kathy Hale from Willow Creek. They say she's causing moral disorder." Kathy's heart plummeted. "Remove me," she whispered. "From town?" "By Friday," the sheriff said softly. "You'll have to leave." Alec's voice was ice. "On what grounds?" Rumors, the sheriff replied. Whispers, nothing but wind has toppled barns before. Alex stepped fully between Kathy and the door. She's done nothing wrong. I know. The sheriff sighed. But the vote was unanimous. You can protest, but they won't hear it. Kathy stood frozen, every breath cold enough to crack. She had survived grief, loneliness, hunger, the silent cruelty of neighbors, but this? Forced exile. I'll pack my things, she whispered. Alec turned sharply to her. No. She shook her head, tears threatening. I can't ruin your standing. It's bad enough they hate me. I won't have them turn on you. Alec took her shoulders gently, steadying her. Kathy, listen to me. You have not ruined a single thing. She pulled away, voice breaking. If I stay, you'll lose everything. He stared at her, then long, hard, like weighing the truth of the world against the truth of his heart. What good is a place in this world, he said quietly, if the person I want standing beside me is driven out of it? Kathy couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Alex sank to one knee. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, not anything but raw truth from a man who had never wasted a word in his life. Kathy Hale, he said, voice rough with emotion. I love you. I don't care what this town says or what they fear, or what they try to take. Stay with me. As my wife. Her breath shattered into a sob. Alec, they want me gone by Friday. Then marry me Friday morning, he said. Walk out of town as Kathy Blackbird, not a woman exiled. She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Do you love me? He asked. The answer rose from a place so deep she hadn't touched it in years. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I do. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like the precious, breakable thing she had never believed herself to be. Outside, snow fell silently across the ranch, soft, steady, endless. A storm had come, but so had a choice, and Kathy was done letting the world decide her worth. By Friday morning, Willow Creek lay under a thin sheet of snow, bright as spilled flour under the winter sun. The cold was sharp, but the air was clearer than it had been in weeks, as if the storm that had battered the town had taken something dark with it. When it passed, inside the small church on the hill, Alec Blackbird stood at the front, wearing the only suit he owned, black wool, pressed carefully the night before. His hands were folded loosely behind his back, but his posture held the stillness of a man prepared to stand against anything. A few ranch families had come, those who valued Alec's horses more than the town's gossip, and those who had enough sense to judge a woman by her conduct, not her reputation. They sat scattered in the pews, faces polite, some warm, some unsure. The Reverend cleared his throat gently. She'll be here soon. Alec nodded. He had no doubt. Kathy Hale was not a woman who broke under judgment. She had endured worse storms than gossip, and lived to see the dawn. Outside, the church doors creaked open. Kathy stepped inside, wearing a simple cream dress she had sewn in 3 sleepless nights. Her fingers clutched a small bundle of winter greenery, pine, juniper, and one white ribbon. Her breath trembled as she took in the room, but her chin lifted with steady resolve. When Alec saw her, something softened in his stern features, like sunlight warming the frost on a window pane. She walked toward him slowly, the hem of her dress brushing lightly across the wooden floor. But just as she reached the first pew, the church doors slammed open behind her. The mayor, flanked by 2 council members, strode in with righteous fury boiling off them, like steam from a locomotive. This wedding cannot proceed, Mayor Dalton barked. The Reverend straightened. On what grounds? The banker's brother, another councilman, lifted the exile order like a weapon. This woman has been legally removed from town limits. She stands here unlawfully. She must leave today. A murmur spread through the guests. Kathy froze, color draining from her face. She clutched her bouquet tighter, knuckles white. Alex stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable. "She's not under exile," he said. The mayor's eyes narrowed. The council voted. "It stands." Alex's voice lowered, not loud, not threatening, but full of something that made men step back on instinct. "In 10 minutes," he said, "she will be my wife. She will live on my ranch. My land sits 5 miles outside your town limits. Your order ends where my property begins." The mayor flushed an ugly red. "You think you can escape the council's will?" Alex's gaze sharpened. "No. I refuse to let you decide who she is or what she deserves." The banker stepped forward. "Blackbird, the bank holds your loans, your accounts. Choose carefully. We can make this hard on you." Alec didn't flinch. "Money is replaceable. A good woman is not." A gasp rippled through the church. Kathy felt her breath catch. Alec hadn't raised his voice once, yet the truth in his words shook the room like thunder. Clarissa Dunn appeared in the doorway then, coat flung hastily over her shoulders, hair wild from running. She burst forward, voice shrill and cracking. "You can't marry her, Alec. She's lied about everything. She's wicked. She's deceitful. She's—" Alec turned, eyes like cold steel. "Clarissa," she faltered. He stepped closer, calm as a settling storm. "You spread the rumors. You hired that man. You tried to shame her." Clarissa's mouth fell open. I only did it for you." "No," he said. You did it for yourself." The church fell silent. Clarissa's voice shrank into something small, desperate. "Alec, please, you can't choose her." He looked at her not cruelly, but with a finality that left no room for hope. "I already have." Clarissa choked on a sob and fled the church, skirts whipping behind her like a wounded bird's wings. The door slammed shut, muffling the sound of her footsteps as she ran into the snow. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Alec turned back to the council. "Leave or stay and witness. But you will not stop this wedding." The mayor stared at him, at the immovable resolve in his stance. He realized this was no longer about rules or gossip. This was about a man drawing a line in the earth and daring anyone to cross it. Slowly, stiffly, the mayor turned and marched out. The banker followed, jaw clenched. The last councilman hesitated, then left with a sigh, closing the doors behind him. And just like that, the storm dissipated. Alec exhaled once. Then he turned to Kathy and offered his hand. "Shall we?" She nodded, tears shimmering but unshed. They walked together to the altar. The reverend, voice steady and warm, began the ceremony. The candles flickered. The gathered families watched with quiet reverence. Alec's vows were simple but powerful. "I vow to see you truly, to honor the strength that carried you through grief, to defend you against unworthiness, and to stand with you through every winter that comes." Kathy's voice trembled with emotion. "I vow to love with courage, to build peace beside you, to choose hope, even when the world tries to take it away." When the reverend said, "You may kiss your bride," Alec cupped her face with hand rough from rope and reins but gentle in ways she hadn't known a man could be. The kiss was soft, pure, and full of promise. The church erupted in applause, genuine, warm, heartfelt. A new story had begun. 1 year later, the Christmas Eve market bustled again. But this time Kathy walked through it on Alec's arm, her belly round with new life, and her heart light as fresh snow. People nodded. Some smiled. Some still held remnants of old prejudice, but most had softened. At the auction booth, Kathy placed her beautifully arranged Christmas basket on the table. Alec stepped forward and said with a grin, $5. Laughter rose all around. "Alec Blackbird, you don't have to buy my cooking," Kathy whispered, blushing. "I know," he murmured. placing a warm hand over hers. But I'm making it tradition. She leaned her head against him. Their child kicked beneath her ribs. Alex's voice softened. You gave me a home I didn't know I needed. And you gave me a life I thought I'd lost, she answered. Snow began to fall, gentle, bright, clean. In Willow Creek, whispers faded. But love, strength, and new beginnings endured. The ranch would thrive. Their family would grow. And Kathy Hale now, Kathy Blackbird, would never again walk alone.